So basically, there are 3 types of editing drafts you do. And you need to do all 3 phases, and you do 3 phases one at a time. Because there's big picture edits, there's the scene-by-scene edits to track story overall, and then there's line-by-line edits. And if you do anything, there's no point in going line by line, editing the reading of every line of your script until you've got the big picture stuff fixed, because you're just going to be throwing away the stuff that you spend all that time working on line by line. So be smart and break up what you do in each draft and do 3 rewrites for yourself and do them in this order, so that you're not wasting time working on minute details you're going to wind up realizing you have to cut later. Okay? Big picture edits. These are the things I'm going to get out of the way now. All right. So 1, genre consistency.
Can we turn down the lights?
Oh, yeah, a little bit more.
You want the script, when you've picked a genre, this is like a checklist. And you're going to go through, now this is not a book yet, so this you might want to take more active notes on at this time. And then buy my book later when it comes out, which won't be for another year or so. Genre consistency is making sure you go through your script and look at every scene and ask yourself, is there a way to punch up what the genre looks like in this scene, in this moment of this movie, and go through every scene with these things in mind. So 1, you make sure your genre is consistently throughout the film. 2, you make sure your 3-act structure is being hit at the right points of the story. Because you might wind up cutting chunks, realizing that, hey, it's Act 2A is too long. I'm taking too long to get to realizing the stakes. Track the character arc. Make sure you are tracking the inner journey throughout the script. These are big picture things. And until you've tracked these big picture things, the little minutia won't count. You'll just have to do the minutia again anyway. Set up some payoffs. If you showed a gun was in a drawer, you better have somebody pull out that gun at some point, otherwise you didn't need to show the gun was in a drawer. Right? Character consistency. I go through the script with each of the major characters in line, and I ask myself, and I go, say the character's name is Joe, the caveman. And you have to make sure, go through the whole script, and make sure that you have given him a unique speaking voice that is consistent throughout the whole movie. If you can read a character's line and cover up the name and read the line, and it could be said by any number of characters in your script, you're not nailing it. So go through a draft for each of your characters and say, does that sound like the unique quality of that character? Does that talk like that person needs to talk? Are they separated? Does their line sound specific to who they are, what they're after, and the kind of person that they are, whether they're extremely obstinate or whether they're a pontificating prig? You know what I mean? So just make sure that the lines are consistent and what they do is consistent with who they are and you've established. I always go through the script and ask myself, can any of these characters in this scene be combined with another character? Why have 2 separate characters when you can combine them and make one character even better for an actor to play? If you see little tiny characters with little juicy bits that are great, look and see if you can give that to one of the more primary characters, because you get a bigger actor interested in playing it. Constant character names and descriptions. Consistent character names and descriptions. You always name them the same thing throughout the whole script. Their descriptions. You don't halfway through the script say, by the way, this guy's 6 feet tall or 6'7". You have to do that when you establish the character, and the character should play that way throughout the script, that he's the big guy. A great script is unpredictable. If you're starting to read it and you think things are a little too predictable, ask yourself, you may have to come to the same conclusions for the way the story moves, but get yourself there in an unpredictable way. The way I refer to screenwriting, it's chaos math, okay? The math takes you through an equation that are all these things you may not have realized or thought, or you couldn't have thought of. But at the end, when you look back at the equation, all the numbers add up. And it makes perfect sense once you see it afterwards. So, it's chaos math, make it unpredictable, but it all makes sense after it's happened. Plenty of white on the page. So one of the things that I do is when you see long dialogue, like a huge monologue, you only want maybe one monologue in a movie. Obviously there are exceptions, yes. Especially, if it's a movie about one guy trapped on an island. Or something like that. There are situations other than that. And there are action lines. You don't want huge blocks of description paragraphs. What you want is to break up those paragraphs. I never have a paragraph in my script when I can avoid it. Maybe one or two will go over in the whole 100 pages I do. But I keep them all to 3 sentences or less, 3 lines or less, 3 lines of space, not 3 sentences, 3 lines of space. And if you're having trouble figuring out where to break up those paragraphs of action, ask yourself, when would the director cut from one shot to another shot to get good coverage? That'll help you figure out where you can break it up. Because the whole idea is when somebody's reading a script and they're going through it, people can lose their place when they're reading a paragraph. And then through no fault of yours, they're going to think your script is repetitive and it reads slow because they keep having to go up because they lost their place. And they're reading the same thing over and over again. But when you're reading a paragraph of 3 lines, you know whether you're on the top line, the middle line, or the bottom line. And you don't lose your place, and then everything flows smoother. It's just about creating readability. Use traditional 4-point carrier font with proper margins, and use proper script covers, and fill out the script cover. It does you no good if they don't know who wrote it or how to contact you. So the cover needs to be done. If you use margins that are not the correct margins for a screenplay, they will instantly think you're covering up something, you're hiding your margins, your script is too short, or your script is too long, and you're trying to hide it from them. And that means you are unprofessional as a writer. So make sure you always keep the standard margins in a document, and that you're always using 12-point carrier font, because that is what screenwriters use. And then a script contains what you see and what you hear, and with nothing else. No explaining, no information, all that stuff I told you not to put in action lines, it doesn't belong in the script. Everything that you want them to think and to know, it has to be something the audience gets from the visuals and the audio and what they mean together when witnessing it. If somebody is sobbing, they know that that person is sad. If somebody is laughing, they know that that person thinks something is funny. You don't say somebody thinks something is funny, they laugh, right? Did you have a question?
Yes. How are you 120 pages? Got to be 120 pages? Or are you writing them shorter now, or are you
just in the general form? For me, the sweet spot is 100 to 105 pages. 100 to 105 to me is the sweet spot. It's much over 90 in case they find things they want to cut. There's room for growth if they want to expand some part of the story or build a bigger character because they have this relationship with so-and-so superstar and they're going to play that role, but the part has to be bigger to get them to do it. That, believe it or not, that crap happens. So I like having something right there in the middle that allows you that. I mean, comedies can be 90 pages, but that's the final draft. I really like 100 to 105. It's a good place because you have room on either side when they give you notes. Because like I just went through a script process and they said, look, we need you to cut 20 pages. Or they want it to be like under 100 pages, right? So we want you to cut 20 pages. Now, here are our notes. And then everything they wanted was to add. All the individual notes were to add things to the script. They will put you in that situation. So if you give yourself a little leeway, and the reason why it wound up at 120 to begin with is because the person who's producing wanted all this stuff in there I didn't want in there to begin with. And now they're saying cut all this amount of pages and now add all this. Because now the financier wants different things in the script. So give yourself elbow room. Try to keep it as lean as possible. But sometimes the dictations of the producer, you can say, look, this is going to be 125 pages because you're asking me to add all this stuff. And just so you know, I put it in an email. Whenever you're going to do something that's untraditional for screen, keep an email chain. And make sure that they say that that's what they wanted. And that way you can say, because sometimes there are passages in your contracts as a writer that says you cannot go past a certain page length. They will put that in your contracts. And then you need it in writing that the producer who hired you said, no, I want all that in there and I want that page. And you can dispute that if there's a disagreement. They try to not pay you later. Yes?
How long does it usually take you to write a screenplay?
It varies based on the situation. It usually takes me, okay, generally speaking, 2 weeks to really beat it out. The outline, the structure, figure out what I want to do, sit on it, sleep on it, come up with ideas while I'm driving, stuff like that. Because you always come up with the stuff when you're not doing the physical, when you're doing something physical where your brain's kind of out to lunch. That's when it all comes to you. And then the actual script writing, 2.5 to 4 weeks to write the script. But I always ask for a 16-week writer window because I like to give it to friends, get feedback, one set of people who are not writers, and one set of people who are writers, and then have that ready. So I like to ask for 16 weeks. But I write a first draft in 4. Sometimes 2.5, depending on the runaway time I have and if I'm invested in other things at the time also that I have to be spending time doing. And then a rewrite, also I like to ask for at least 4 to 6 weeks in that. They try to get you to 2 weeks. I ask for 6, and then I can come down to 4. But that gives me time to do a rewrite for myself based on their notes, then give it to my friend, the editor, who kicks my butt on it before I give them the final draft as well. And then for a polish, you could probably the polish notes are sometimes things you can actually do in a day or 2. But I always make sure I have 2 weeks because I like to have. I really think that the longer you have to sit with something, the more ideas keep coming to you. And there's a time that you're writing, and then people don't realize you're next. And then you realize there's that time between when you've done the work and when you turn it in that things will just keep coming to you, and you want to use that time. You'll wish you had it when you turn it in. So I try to never turn in an assignment before the due date in the contract, because it just gives me more time to think about it. And I'm always working on it. It's always in my head. Yes?
You don't have slick line up there on that last thing. Is that because you think it's part of what you see, or did you?
It's not. We're not there yet. We're not on. That's scene by scene. These are just overall things that you can go throughout the script. Okay. Yes?
Do you try to do a certain page, a number of pages a day, 5 pages, stop, or get to 5 pages? I know that's a lot of people do that.
I don't. I think that writing some scripts is more difficult than writing other scripts. And some situations and some scenes require more finesse than others. But the truth is, once I have my outline, I usually can roll pretty fast through actually writing the script. It's the rewrite before I turn it in where the time really varies. Because basically the first draft, the vomit draft, is just I'm getting the story out of me so that the story is moving forward on the page. And I have it from beginning to end, and all the general scenes are there. And what needs to happen. That's on the page. Fun. That's the most fun part for me of the entire process. It's the free fall, it's the roller coaster. You're writing and feeling the wind in your hair. It's like, yahoo! That's like, yes, I love writing! And then after that, you have to take, and I do a lot of that stuff in the afternoon and the evenings when I'm less, in the mornings I'm very detail oriented. I have to do things and I get them done, and then you relax after a little while. So in the mornings I edit. And for editing, sometimes you're working through a scene and you just need to rework it and rework it. I never have trouble building a story, but the times you slow down is when you're finding the exact right way to maneuver your way through a scene or a moment and a beat so you can hit it right. And that can take longer than you want it to take. And that can take any stretch of time because you're trying to figure out the exact thing, that exact way to do it that is both unpredictable and makes perfect sense for the character and keeps the conflict high. It's a lot to ask, but so the first draft, just have fun and just keep writing and get the ideas onto the page, and then you can work on the minutia moments in your rewrite. Don't stop writing. Don't start rewriting while you're writing it, unless the rewrite that you realize you need to do affects writing the whole rest of the script and the plot has changed. Then you can stop because then you're writing just to rewrite the whole thing. But unless you're changing the whole plot and the focus of everything that's going to happen forward, just keep moving forward. Make a note for yourself on a separate piece of paper on something you want to do if you have a note for a fix later that has come to you, and then put that aside and finish the script. Just get a draft done. And then turn around and say, thank you to myself for doing it, and I'm sorry I had to do it that way. And just know that it's okay that the first draft is not ready to show anybody. That's why they call it the vomit draft. You don't show people your vomit. Okay.
Some people.
So, after you look at all the things that are the major changes you may have to make, you take it scene by scene. Enter late, leave early. We talked about that earlier. Enter as late as you can in a scene where the conflict starts. You don't need to show people entering. You don't need to show people leaving. Unless the leaving is like the slamming of the door, which leads to a scene where somebody is charging in a different door. And there's a reason for the conflict to lead to another conflict. Use locations for tension, metaphor, irony, and poignancy. This is what you're talking about slug lines. Make sure the locations you use for every scene say something either reflecting the genre or playing an antithetical or metaphorical way on what that scene is about or what your story is about. When people have, you notice that they do breakup scenes in a park. You know, you could have a scene about somebody not wanting to have a family. Put that beside a playground. You know, use what the scene is about, and then create a juxtaposition or a metaphor for what it is they're trying to say in the surroundings. The scene, the visual mise-en-scène, which is what you see in the screen when you're shooting a story. The mise-en-scène is another layer of the story that you're trying to say. It is a character. Believe it or not, the world that every story is set in is a character you have to think about that is constantly commenting on what it is the scene is about and what the story is about. Thwart expectation through realization. Have twists versus reveals. Okay? Plot twists and reveals. Now, here's something. A lot of people, you can't have exposition in a story. Okay? A lot of people rely on exposition. But the way you use exposition properly, if you need to have exposition and need information to be out in the audience so that they understand it, you do not give the exposition in advance so that they know it when they get to the situation where it's necessary. What happens is a situation arises, and then through an exposition that is required in that moment and cannot occur any later because it reveals something. If you hide your exposition in a reveal of new information at the exact moment at which you cannot reveal it any later, all of a sudden it stops being exposition and starts being a reveal. And people love reveals and they hate exposition. So don't tell us stuff we think we need to know in advance. Let it happen in the moment that it needs to happen at the latest possible moment in the script.
Is that another way of saying that the second act is often the hardest to write and where movies fail?
Yes, of course it is.
Can you give an example of that? In the moment, exposition.
You asking that question right now has thwarted the moment.
Nice.
Okay, let me put it. Let me think about
Not
that.
what I meant.
No. Reveal. Okay. Somebody is finding out the story. You do this in flashbacks where you're revealing a piece of information, and you don't tell somebody that we don't tell the audience. Okay, who has seen The Sixth Sense?
That's good.
Everybody.
Yeah,
All
we're
right.
gonna ruin it.
I'm ruining it. If you're listening to this at home and you haven't seen it, skip this part. And I will tell you, I will wave at you when you can turn it back on and skip forward to. All right. At the end of the movie, if you had told the audience sooner that he was dead, the whole movie falls apart because you don't need to explain it. You keep the secret from the audience of what's going on until the last possible minute.
Yeah.
Because then it's a reveal. They could have told him at the beginning, when he says, in 45 minutes in, the kid says, I see dead people, and you're one of them.
Right. That's right.
You didn't need to tell the audience that then. You have to parse out the information at a need-to-know basis with the audience so you can keep them on the hook for not knowing things so you have things to reveal later. How's that?
It's really good.
All right, you can turn back on now.
It's also really hard to do.
It is hard to do, but our job is hard, yes.
So, a movie that I watched recently that I thought was really great about that iRobot with Will Smith. And
Yes.
With like the arm and the opening scene.
Yeah.
Like he's sitting with
When he has his arm ripped off, when he,
Mhm.
yes.
And then later, how it calls back to the arm, and then later again, how it was the key to. Are those reveals, or are they something different?
No, those are, they're reveals. You're finding out information about, you realize he has a mechanical arm at some point. Then you reveal why he has a mechanical arm, which then explains why he's the way he is. But they don't do things until they realize that's the moment in which the audience has to know, otherwise the next scene doesn't make sense. You only reveal things at the time you have to reveal them. Keep your secrets. Keep your secrets and keep what you have going on interesting. Because you're keeping secrets, not an excuse to be boring, and not an excuse not to have exciting things going on.
Or confusing.
Or confusing, exactly, yes.
But if he had not, if they did not do it well, we would have seen him wake up and go, oh my gosh, I've got a mechanical arm. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or they could have done it where at the beginning of the movie, they showed what happened to the kid and how he had, how his arm was ripped off. They could have shown all that at the beginning, and then there would have been no reveal of character after we get to know him. They waited until a point in the story where we needed to know that information about him, to understand his psychology and what he's doing at that moment in the story. All right, maximize conflict through POV and setting. All right, so every scene, each character has to have a POV. That point of view is what it is they're trying to accomplish in the scene. Everybody has something they need to try to do. That they're in the scene to do something. A teenage girl wants to get her mom to let her stay out till 10 o'clock and go out with her boyfriend and go to prom. I don't know. Okay? But now the mom, you want to make that harder. So you want to maximize a POV shift that makes it harder for the protagonist to get what they want so you can create conflict. So maybe the mom, instead of just having her not wanting her daughter to go out, she's watching her famous soap opera. And her favorite hunkiest actor is on television right now. Now it's just like, no, no, no. You maximize the conflict in the moment by creating a situation that makes it so that she can't get the permission from her mom without distracting her and telling her what she wants. And the mom can't get what she wants as long as she's talking. So you create situations that make it really hard for the protagonist to get what they want by maximizing conflict and putting them in each other's way of getting what they want in a scene. Maximize POV to create a situation so that they cannot move forward without the other person. Hunger! What is that?
Cookie Monster.
Cookie Monster? Cookie! All right. Constantly escalating obstacles, stakes, and tension. Obviously, okay, throughout a film, things have to get bigger, scarier, badder, worse stakes, worse things happen, so that your blood should be constantly rising in a movie. There's a reason why the metaphor that they use is that ladder, or the slope that does this, as your rising tension to create structure. Because things need to constantly be escalating, right? You can start off a little lighter, but there's always conflict, but the level of conflict and the stakes always moving upward. So, in the middle of the story, if you see you have stakes in one scene at the beginning of the story that are heavier, and then at the end they're not as heavy, you might want to consider switching those two beats so that the more impactful, heavier, stronger, more dynamic, scarier thing is closer to the end. Because you want to be building. So you have something really scary here and there's something less impactful after that, your audience is going to get bored because you got them thrilled and then you're like, okay. You know what I mean? Yeah. So make sure that the escalations that happen in order from worst to worst to worsest. That's not even a word, but I made that up. Okay. You pinpoint the important moments to slow down and hit the details. Okay. A script should read quickly. Everything is about the read. That's why I said break up the paragraphs. So it's boom, 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 boom down the page. And if you want it to read faster, the faster you want it to read, the more action beat oriented you get. And if it's a real action sequence, you'll go one line, one line, one line, one line. Whereas 3-line paragraphs are more for full scenes and something's happening dramatic and it's heavy or whatever. And then as the size of the paragraph should indicate the pace at which you're cutting the script. It's cutting from scene to scene or moment to moment or action to action. and hit the details. The moment. Now there are times you want to stop and take a moment, and a script should read constantly well paced and moving fast. But at the big moments of change for your character that are the most important, which are the escalation points and the major turning points for the inner journey that are putting them to the challenge, that's where you can slow it down just a touch and give us a little more juice on the page. Really squeeze the juice out at those points. The story is moving, and then when you get to a moment where there's real change happening, slow down and really take in that beat. That doesn't mean talk about what the color of the trees and the autumn leaves are. That's not what that means. It means give your characters a moment to experience the, excuse my French, holy shit nature of that moment.
Example.
Example. You move action along, and then all of a sudden, a character finds out the first part of the movie is about them getting home to their mother. And all of a sudden, there's a moment where they find out Mom died before you got here. There is a beat. He looks sick. Face runs pale. He gets off his feet. Micah, I'm sorry that, and he holds up a hand, stopping words from being spoken. His only lines are, fuck, fuck, fuck. Everything was moving right up until that moment. And then you stop in the moment of holy shit. And you let it stir and dig in. Because those are the moments the actors are doing your movie for. They want those moments. They're dying to delve into those moments. And let them know in the script you are giving them that moment. And let the director know this is the moment that you're waiting to tell. And the rest of the time move it along at a clip. But sometimes you have to stop because the moments you want the audience to see where change happens, you have to slow down and make it clear that the audience and the filmmaker, because people read scripts fast, and if you don't stop and slow down and make it clear to the reader that this is a moment of pinnacle change for your character and your story, they might just skip over it and not realize how big it is. So you're not only helping the actor, you're helping the director, and anybody who's helping bring your vision to light, or what is the director's vision in the movie medium. It's everybody's medium. We're all friends here. But there's that moment. That moment needs to be quantified, realized, and you need to take a minute so everybody can take it in. Because if you are moving the pace along and then you slow down, they know it's important. So you move things fast until those key moments, and then
So how do you write that?
I just showed you.
Yeah.
Time stops. The character sits down. His face runs pale. You know, you're not describing the emotional moments of everything, because you don't tell an actor how to act. You don't sit there and tell them, you know, how to do every moment. The worst writers are the ones who have to think that they have to tell the writer how to act every beat. There's nothing more insulting. It's not the writer's job. Because one actor can do the same scene one way, but the way a different actor would do it would be 10 times if he did it his own way. And sometimes it's right for a certain actor to play it as sarcastic, but if you cast another guy in it, the way it's going to be best, if it's definitely sincere and quiet. So you have to trust the casting. But in these big emotional moments, it doesn't matter who the cast is. This is a story beat, not a character beat. It's a story beat that changes the story and where things are going and what is going to happen next. So there's a difference. Where was I? Okay, does the scene affect the inner journey and premise? Go, as you're looking at the scene, ask yourself, how is this commenting on what the character flaw is and his journey toward the character goal? Just ask yourself, is there a way to bring that into it so you can keep hitting your motif and keep hitting your premise and reminding the audience that this is really about something. It's a subconscious thing. They're not going to know that that's what you're doing, but it is part of keeping their mind engaged in what it is you're trying to say subconsciously. Does the scene affect the outer journey? Well, if not, it doesn't belong in the movie. All the scenes should relate to the stuff. Does it comment on the premise, the theme, or the central question? Theme is like good versus evil, man versus machine, a revenge story, whatever. Those are themes. It's not an opinion. A premise is an opinion. And then the central question is, will this character accomplish this task by the end of the movie? It's basically the outer journey, just so you guys know what they are. The beginning want or goal, middle pursuit, and end result. Make sure you're doing all those three things. The character has a want, and they make a goal. They pursue that thing, all of Act 2, and are you doing that? And then are you ending with a result? And that even works for the scene. Does the scene begin with a character coming into the scene with a want? This is scene specific. Are they pursuing that throughout the whole thing? Do they get off topic? Do you get off topic? Do you go on to some subject you think is interesting and you want to talk about, but it doesn't fit the scene? Ask yourself. And then, did the result of pursuing that thing, how did that end up for this character in this scene? Leave unfinished business. You can't answer every question in every scene, otherwise it's like having a chapter ending with no cliffhanger. I don't need to read the next scene. One of the biggest and most important skills a screenwriter can have is exactly knowing where to end the scene and how to begin the next scene and how that transfer happens to materialize. Like I talked about the gun to the mouth. That moment is pop, boom. You're in the next scene already without even thinking about it. I'll be nice. Cut to, he's got a gun in the guy's mouth. You've gone to the next scene. You're not thinking about how they did it. You just know, holy crap, I'm there. It keeps propelling you forward. And that's what I was talking about, transitions. All right. So those are the scene by scene.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you're talking about slowing down, I'm thinking about this in relation to books that I write, okay, but when you're talking about slowing that down.
Oh, books are slow. And there's nothing wrong with that. You read a book for a different reason than you watch a movie.
As you're looking at editing, you're talking about slowing down. I'm just wondering, you're looking at the pacing on it at the scene by scene level. You're not looking at it at the big picture, or are you in it just a different way? Because to me, it would be important to know if I have too many places where I'm slowing it down, it's dragging, or not enough where the pacing is off. So
Right.
to me, that's a big picture thing. How
Right,
do
but you
manage that
can only
big
do
picture?
that scene by scene.
Okay.
Because this is something you're looking at scene by scene to fix. Just like where a scene is located, you're looking at that for each individual scene.
Okay.
You're not looking at the location of the whole thing unless the whole movie is set in a library at a high school, with a few minor exceptions like in The Breakfast Club.
Right. Okay. So if you take care of the scene by scene, you're taking care of the big picture, is what you're telling me.
Right, you're just doing it on the detailed notes from one moment to the next.
Yes. Okay, I got you.
Yes.
You said don't tell the actor how to act, but like in Chartier's book, he talks about how sometimes it's okay to describe the camera movement. Would you say that's okay or not okay?
You don't put camera moves specifically in the script, but sometimes you can imply them. For example, if I tell you, the hard chiseled cowboy boots step into the saloon. Those jeans are so tight they might hurt you. That belt buckle, I've never seen anything so huge. My God, that torso. That shirt is so tight on his torso. I think that he stopped having children some time ago because nothing can get through this. You know? And an eye is crystal blue and intense, and that hat with buckles all around it, it just says, hell yeah. You know, now I'm joking because you wouldn't put a lot of that stuff in there, but you know the shot is this. You're not saying, look at the boots and pan up. You would never do that. It's insulting to a director to tell them how to shoot something, but you can get away with hinting at things. And you can hint at things through how you reveal them in the action lines. But honestly, you have to trust the director. And like I said, I don't agree with anybody on everything. And I honestly believe that, yes, there are moments for me, that's why I break up the paragraphs where I do, is because I'm telling the director, you can cut here. You can cut here. This will keep, because believe it or not, you're supposed to cut like every 4 seconds or whatever, 3 to 4 seconds, 2 to 4 seconds, just to keep it visually rolling or whatever. So I'm basically helping, I believe I'm an assistant, a story assistant, but the director is going to choose when to cut and when it's actually a good time to hold on something and slowly push in on something. And that's a director's call. And you have to let and trust the director to call their own shots, but you can imply what you mean if you want to.
So you would never write like fade, close up, switch pan? anything like
Never.
that? Never.
Never. Did I say never? Never. I think that unless you're directing the script yourself.
Right.
Yes.
Did you see the recent movie, Ready or Not?
Yes.
Yes. So in that movie, I felt like the plot thickened, but they never raised the stakes. But I can't figure out why I feel that.
Because the characters were numbskulls. All the people trying to kill them, they were idiots. And they kept being idiots, and they kept being flummoxed. And if you don't have a threat that is actually threatening, and they're actually not knowing what they're doing, and they're out of place, I understand it for the sense of the humor that it was going for.
Right.
But the truth is that the characters were kind of numbskulls. They'd never done this before in their lifetimes for the most part. And they were all, the game is, the movie is about a girl who's marrying into a family who created a bunch of very, very popular board games. And on the wedding night, they use this ancient box to tell them which game they're going to play at midnight with the new bride. And if one specific card comes up, then that game is to hunt and kill the bride-to-be. Or the husband-to-be who's joining the family. And of course, in this story, that's what happens at the inciting incident, or the whatever. And then, so she gets in, she agrees to play the game, and then she gets the game, not knowing that game is even an option. And then they're trying to kill her the whole time. But the people who have to kill her, they're not killers. Some of them may know how to use a weapon or something, but they just aren't very threatening. And when you have a movie about hunting people, when the hunters are a little bit buffoonery, it takes the tension out of a movie that was designed and shows in its previews. You go into that movie thinking it's an intense, hardcore, somebody's going to be killed, and people are going to be killing people, and it's going to be deadly, and it's a huge game of hunt and death, right?
Yes.
And then you get there, and the hunters are kind of idiots. People keep hitting the wrong people. They're totally incompetent.
Yes.
And so they sold you one movie in the preview, and then they gave you a different movie when you watched it. And that's why it doesn't ring true to you afterwards.
Yes.
That sounds like they were trying to take Tucker and Dale versus Evil and make it serious.
Yeah, which is also a very good movie.
Yeah.
That one's actually good because it doesn't tell you. It actually sells itself as the kind of funny horror movie that it is.
Right.
Just like Shaun of the Dead is very funny but horror, but you get it because that's the humor through the whole thing, and the humor is part of it. Whereas that movie was sold on this dark, gloomy-looking mansion castle and the dark colors and shadows, and we're going to hunt and kill the bride, and then all of a sudden you get there and everybody's a freaking idiot.
So in terms of what you've been talking to us about today, if we were to try to fix that movie, would we say the relationship between the characters would need to change? So like they would need to...
It's a tonal question. It's a question of genre.
Yeah.
You need to hit the genre harder.
Okay,
They did not sell that movie as a comedy.
that's true.
And what it was is they were trying to be funny.
Yes.
And the truth is they didn't cast comedians to do it either. And if you're going to do a funny horror movie, you cast somebody who you know can do the comedy. And it's not that the actors were bad, and it's not that the filmmaking is bad. It was just simply an execution problem, and the film wasn't marketed the way it was made.
And sometimes you get a comedy actor, and then it doesn't matter what kind of trailer it is. You know it's a comedy.
That's right. That's why you cast. That's why actors get pigeonholed into the kind of movies they are, because it's a way to attract people to the audience, because it's selling the genre. You know, if you've got Jim Carrey in a movie, you're going to laugh. I mean, Jim Carrey is a very capable dramatic actor. Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a brilliant, brilliant movie. But if you see Jim Carrey in a thing, you're going to get comedy and you're going to get that going in. You put him in a movie with some horror and you get him one overcomplicated, super funny reaction shot, you know you have a horror comedy and you're good. So that's what the problem was with that. And I actually liked the idea for the movie very much, and I understand why it was produced. The cinematography was good, the lighting was good, the sets were good. A lot of the actors were very capable. It just, for me, the movie, if it was meant to be that tone, it wasn't cast for that tone, and then they didn't sell the tone of what the movie really was. Okay.
Good question for you.
Yes.
When you do your editing and when you're finishing up, do you get into character? Like, do you kind of walk through your script yourself?
I think we all do that when we're writing it.
Yeah. I mean, like when you finish, do you literally get into that form and go through that character? Like literally do it, not just like reading it.
Do I get up and I act it out?
Yeah.
I know something that a lot of people do, which they find very beneficial, is you put together a cold reading of your script when you're done, and assign roles to different people. Don't let them look in advance, and then have them read it and see what lines they're tripping over, what things are not working in the play, at which time does the dialogue feel stilted or hard to say, or does it feel like it's falling flat in the escalations by hearing people try to act it out in the moment. And I think that's one way to get what you're looking for. Personally, I have trouble acting something out with myself, but at the same time, when I'm going through it, people make fun of me who see me write, because I'll be sitting there like this, and I'm like, you know, so my head is going through it. I'm like totally, you know, I'm in there. I'm like, wait a minute. And I'm like, what's the word? You know, and you do that. So in a sense, I'm acting it out, but I don't get up and talk to myself.
It's very cathartic.
What?
It's very cathartic. You should try it.
Believe me, I have enough voices in my head. Okay. So let's continue. Now, line by line gets really detailed. So once you've done all those big notes, you're now looking at action lines. And action is separate from dialogue. All right? So action lines have different things. One, easy to read, break it up. Two, if you can't physically see it or hear it, you've got to cut it out of the action lines. I've been over that a couple times. Be hard on yourself. Everything is in the order it occurs. You don't say someone hits the ground, hits the deck after the window smashes. You have to say the window smashes, then he hits the deck. Everything needs to be written in the order that it happens, because you're painting a picture in the active present in the order that it's happening. So people think, literary people, in a book, you can do the opposite. You can do it the other way. You can mess with things so that you have different reading sentences, so you can kind of twist up how something's reading so it doesn't feel like you're saying it the same way every time. But in a script, this is a blueprint. We're not putting the wallpaper up there. We don't do set design in our script like they do sometimes in books. In a movie, it's this happens, then this happens. And it happens in this order. So you keep everything moving forward and don't put things out of order. Paragraph size, I talked about that already, relates to pace. So the shorter the block of paragraph, the faster the cuts. Vocabulary, find the right word. We already talked about that, using the right verb, not adverbs. Yes?
In terms of right word, are we thinking kind of the same we do with books that you should write at like an 8th grade level, or can you use your bigger words?
You can use bigger words, just make sure there's, look, the whole idea of a script is that it is a blueprint and you can just thumb through it. Okay, yeah. You don't want to break out a thesaurus and break out words that people are going to be like, what? But, 8th grade, I'm fine with a high school level. Just don't get doctorate on me. Fantastic basic English. I would rather you write simple basic sentences in a script than to write complicated, wordy sentences that may have grammatical errors. Every bit of your English has to be spot on, because you got to understand, when somebody reads your script, their job, no offense to anybody, is to figure out reasons to say no.
Yeah.
Nobody gets fired for saying no to something in this town. Not really, not often. It's more about, you said yes to something original, and then it didn't work. You're fired. That's why so many people use pre-produced IP and write sequels and based on bestsellers and all that stuff. That all happens because of the fact that people don't want to put their risk, they cannot risk their job because they're trusting a new idea and a new writer. So one of the things they can pick people on is this person can't be trusted to write a sentence. How do I trust that he can write an hour-and-a-half story? So proper punctuation. Do not use a comma as a period. No comma splices. You know, when you do a list, do not put an and between everything in the list. The and goes between the last two things in the list and a comma between the other things leading up to it. You know, tense issues. You don't say they. Anyway, you get the idea. All right.
But doesn't the vocabulary and the grammar depend on the person?
Good English and bad English doesn't have a point of view.
This is action lines too.
Oh, action. So wait, what are you saying?
Like somebody who probably doesn't speak
She's talking about
properly.
dialogue.
Oh no, that you're talking about dialogue. This is specifically action lines. Only in action lines. When somebody speaks in dialogue, if the character has poor English, then that's fine. You write it that way because that's dialogue. That's individual character.
Can you like misspell words, like if it's
In action lines?
No, in dialogue. Like if somebody's like no, but it's like no, or like what the fuck? But that's like 17 U's, not 7. You know what I mean?
People are very torn on this issue.
Right.
They are torn, and I lean towards the version of this where you don't do that. I will underline the word that needs to be emphasized rather than spell something wrong. Like I will only underline. You can only use an underline in a script, I say, 4 times max. So it better be important. And I would underline it. I don't, because one thing somebody says, you write no. The first thing the reader's going to say, cheese ball, melodramatic, not realistic, not grounded. You know, you can't. And then it's also, you're telling the actor how to do their job again. Let the actor do their job. The only reason I underline a word in a sentence is because if I don't emphasize it, they may read the word and understand what the whole sentence means incorrectly. All action lines are written in third person. There was a trend in the 70s and 80s where they do we see this and we hear that. Not anymore. Don't do it. Yes, it's technically, nobody's going to arrest you for it, but the truth is, we all think it's a waste of time. Beats versus pauses. People don't realize there's a difference. When somebody says there's a pause and there's a beat, they are two different things. A pause is, there's a pause. Just like that. I didn't change my intent when I paused. And the sentence wasn't going to change. It was just there was a pause. So pauses, you can put them in, but they're not really important. And people sometimes put beat in there because they think, oh, that's a pause. It's not a pause. A beat will happen maybe once a scene, but not often that much. And a beat is a moment when new information is introduced into the scene and it literally changes the goal of the other character in the scene, or that character. So something happens and literally the whole reason for the scene or everything they're going after changes on a dime. Like for example, the thing I acted out with your mother's dead. He was trying to get to his mother. The minute he finds out his mother's dead, that's a beat change. That's where you can put beat, because instantly his goal to get to his mother has stopped. And he has to, what's his new goal? And you may not know what that is at the moment, but the whole idea is that the point is whatever they were going after at that moment changes because the stakes have changed. Yes?
Now, when you're saying put a beat in there, are you saying in the parentheses?
When I put it in there, I put it in parentheses, yes.
Okay, so
a dialogue parenthetical, which has to be above the dialogue and below the name of the person.
But you're actually saying type in beat, type in pause.
I don't like to use pauses, I'll be honest.
Okay.
And I don't like to use beats. I only use beat when it's one of those big moments you want to slow down for. So the big escalation points. You can use the word beat.
So the beat is more of a dun dun dun
yes.
kind of thing.
It is.
What
Yes.
about M dashes and ellipses?
Okay, dashes and ellipses are different. Two hyphens together after a word means they were cut off. So I'm in the middle of, and then somebody else says, "Oh, shut up." You know, I was literally cut off at midstream in the middle of a sentence where I wasn't trailing off. Whereas the three dots, the ellipses, are I was in the middle of a thought but then realized I didn't need to finish it. You know is what I was going to say. You use ellipses when you're going to lean on a cliche line and then you don't need to finish it because the audience already knows where you were going. You never write a complete cliche. If you rely on a cliche, the whole reason why you use a cliche is literally not to finish it. So the audience is already with you, and then the minute you know they're going to get what you're doing, you immediately get out of there and you stop saying it, because the truth is that they're already with you and you don't want them to get ahead of you. Keep ahead of them. Okay. Now we're in dialogue. Oh no, we're the do not list of action lines. We're still in action lines. Okay. Are we ready? These are the do nots. Don't use adverbs, find the right verb. No passive or past tense in action lines. John's standing in the doorway. John is standing in the doorway, and John stands in the doorway. For some reason, when you say John is standing in the doorway, I kind of see him leaning there on the door sill a little bit, you know, just kind of blocking it a little bit. When you say John stands in the doorway, you know he's blocking that thing, right? Active present tense. So no passive or past tense. No unnecessary words. There are words like John starts to do this, begins to do that. You don't need starts to and begins to. If they do it, they're starting to do it. You don't need John continues to do this, they're just doing it. You don't need words like up or down. John stands up, John stands. John sits down, John sits. Yes?
What if the purpose is to show that John's leaning?
Then you would say John leans in the doorway.
Leans.
Yeah, you would use the actually word that means what you're implying, as opposed to saying what you're saying, but not really in the way that you should be saying it. You don't put ranks or titles in the action lines, because you have to. If you want somebody to know this guy's a captain, you have the person come up and say, "Captain," right? Show it. Put it in dialogue so the audience gets the information. No relationships. You don't tell me this character is that person's mother. You don't explain relationships in the action lines. You show it. A little girl cries. Then Joan, 45 years old, says, "Come here, baby," and holds her in her arms. You know it. And the kid goes, "Mommy." You know the relationship because you're putting it in a way the audience is being given the information. No similes, because you need to conclude what's happening, not the idea of what's happening. No conclusions, no information, no intentions. You can't tell us what people mean when they say something. You have to say something and leave it to the actor to imply it, and then you have to put it in a way that makes sense. No danglers or orphans. This is a fun one. As you may have noticed, I'm kind of really retentive about how things read. So if I see one word hanging over to take up a whole nother line of the script, I will look back through the whole paragraph or whatever it's in and find the word I need to cut out in order to bring it up a full line. Because you want the script to read a true length. One word hanging over is taking up a whole line of space that you can be using to tell your story.
You skip speed bumps.
Yep.
And that's such a good one, too. How ironic. Can I just say how ironic? I speed bumped right over it. Speed bumps are when you put action lines between dialogue lines that don't actually do anything for you. So when you have dialogue bouncing back and forth, you want images, yes, about every three lines of dialogue. It'd be good if there's something visual happening because it's a visual medium, but it doesn't have to, okay? But you don't put descriptions like, so tell me about Aunt Fabi. What happened to her? He sips his coffee. You don't need he sips his coffee. Go to the answer. Don't use useless information, or he takes a drag on his cigarette, or I can't tell you how many. You don't need to dictate the minute actions in between, because you're breaking up the flow of a scene that is supposed to be about dialogue. It's about that interchange. Yes?
How do you break up so much dialogue then? I mean, if you're having...
Find ways to communicate what it is. Okay, for example, if the scene is about... One of the great things, like there's a scene in Basic Instinct where they're talking about the case, and it's a detective and the girl he's begun to sleep with, who's the suspect, and he's sitting there talking about, how do you know I didn't do it? He's breaking up the action because she's in the kitchen, literally the murders are with an ice pick, and she's with an ice pick breaking up a block of ice.
Right.
That's happening with the dialogue, and you're breaking up the, how can anybody think that I'm the one who did it? Or maybe I did do it. And she's stabbing the frickin' ice and tearing it into chunks. You're giving a physical thing happening in the scene during the dialogue that is something that is happening at the moment, but is not saying something that is pointless. It actually is pointing to, not separate from, but pointing to what they're talking about. And answering questions for you. Yes?
So if they are taking a puff on a cigarette, so would that be in the?
You don't need to tell them, you say at the beginning of the scene, you say they smoke.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, you'd say that at the top of the scene. When you break up dialogue with an action, the action has to be specific to the moment, and it should change the next line of action, the next line of dialogue. It should be reflected in what happens next. That's how the scene is constantly building. No doing anyone else's job in the script. You don't need to comment on the wallpaper. It doesn't matter. Yes, if we're in New England in the fall and the leaves are a rainbow of colors, that's great. You don't need to talk about one drifting to the ground unless it literally happens at the moment when somebody finds out somebody's dead, and then you see a dead leaf drifting to the ground. Then it's about the moment and a visual metaphor. But unless it's that, you don't need to comment about the superfluous things in the setting, or you don't need to comment, like, when you tell us what somebody's wearing, it needs to stand out as being specific to that character. You don't need to tell people he wears t-shirt and jeans. Boring, we assume people are wearing t-shirt and jeans. But if he's wearing a cowboy hat, now that I need to know. Because if he's a cowboy, that tells us something about character. If he has an eye patch, or he carries a gun on his waist, that's important. Now if he's in a cop uniform, that's important. You tell us things that we need to know. If he has a mohawk with blue hair, important. That makes it stand out. You don't say stuff that's normal. He's decked in Armani, important. It's a status symbol, yes.
So would you also say if they're in an environment where everybody else is dressed one way and they are dressed differently?
That's important, because you've literally made it an issue and you're defining character through environment.
Like a cowboy in New England.
Yes.
Race, gender.
Right. Again, there are a lot of thoughts on this too. This one isn't cut and dry. I usually find the name, when it's important to me that somebody is a certain gender, I pick a name that's very clearly one gender. If the race is important to the story and the plot, because the actual race plays into something, then yes, you put it. Some people think you should specify either way just to increase the presence of minorities, because sometimes people, idiots, don't think outside of the white male box. And I respect that. But I personally believe most roles, and if I think a character can be a man or a woman, I specifically give them a name like Alex that could be either, and then let the reader read it and see what they think, and they'll come up with their own ideas for casting ideas, and based on if they recommend, now is this a guy or a girl? I said, I don't know, what do you think? I say, it doesn't matter to me. I like to leave things open and not tell them how to do it, because I believe anybody can play anything unless the role is specifically male for a reason and something is specifically white or black or Chinese or Japanese or anything for a reason. Otherwise, I believe anybody can play anything. So I try not to, but I also understand the desire to put in there that you do want to say, this is a minority, this is that, and that's okay too. People accept that, and it is allowed.
But you do age. You do it.
Always do age.
Always do.
Always do age. Even if somebody is 10,000 years old, he looks 35.
And you write 10,010-000. You don't write 10,000. You don't say 45.
With editing, in dialogue, every number is supposed to be spelled out, not written as a number. That's dialogue, because you have to know how it reads and how it's spoken. But when it comes to ages, you put a number. When it comes to ages and times on a clock, in action lines, you can use the actual numbers. But in dialogue, you always spell it out. Yes.
And in that example, what you're saying is, in the description, you say 35, but then in the dialogue, you're like, oh my God, you look 35 for, 10,000 years old.
Right.
So you would put the actual age in the dialogue because we don't
You
have
still put the actual age of the character when they are introduced, always. You put the name in all caps the first time they appear in the script, and only the first time they appear in the script, because you're letting the audience know this is the entrance of this character, so remember it. And then directly after the age, you put a comma, directly after the name, you put a comma, you put the age in actual numbers, then you put another comma, and then continue with the description.
So let me clarify my question. So do we put the age that we think they look, and then we put the age that they are? So like say we have a
No,
character.
you put the age that they are.
Okay. Even if they look 35, we still put 10,000 when we introduce them in the description.
That's a tough one.
Young looking.
It's a complicated question.
Let's just cast Denzel, because he can play any role. I'm just saying that, man.
Okay.
I always put the age that they are, but I would put, if it's, okay, it's a difference between a fantasy, whether something is 10,000 years old, I would just put looks 35.
Okay.
And then you could, because you're going to put 10,000 years old, but the audience is not going to glean that information when they're watching the movie. You have to put information in the movie the way the audience gleans it.
Right.
So I would put looks 35, and then in dialogue you'll establish the real age.
Okay.
But the truth is that when it's a realistic story and it's not a fantastical thing, I always put the actual age.
Okay.
Regardless, because they're going to cast somebody who looks young or looks old, that's not up to you. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
So the movie, what was it? Jim Carrey with the vampire, and she likes biting you in your thigh, and she was really thousands of
Once
years-
bitten.
Yes.
Yes. So in that, the way you would write that is, she's, I would say 30 at the time. Let's say she's
Yeah.
30 at the time. You would put 30.
Looks 30,
Okay.
whatever, yeah.
Okay.
Like I hate to say it, I would never put brunette, because that's what the normal hair color is of most people. Or if somebody's a redhead and that's a point, then yes. It's only the unique points that make somebody stand out. Then say it. Otherwise, let them cast whoever they want, whatever they want. It's not my business as long as they can act the role the hell out of it. Yes.
And it's always a specific age, right? It's not like 30s. It's-
You can do 30s.
Okay.
Yeah. You can do 30s. 30s, 40s, 50s, 70s, hundreds. No. Not yet. Give us a couple more years, more medical advancements. All right. No camera angles. No, you don't have to tell people when they walk right or left or whatever. If they're pacing, that's fine. But general blocking, like specific blocking, goes over and picks up a thing from the table. Leave that to the director. Let them figure out how they want things to physically move into space if it's not necessary. If he's not getting a drink specifically to dump it in somebody's face, you don't need to tell us that he goes and picks up a drink. He can go to the bar and pour himself a drink because he just got information, because that's about what the response is to the thing before, and it's forwarding that moment. And it's a reply to that moment, and then the next moment's going to be built off the fact that he needed a drink. But general blocking for the purpose of blocking, don't do it. No negative actions. You do not write in an action line what people are not doing. You don't say that she does not respond. You could say she sits silently. She sits in silence. But you don't tell us what she's not doing. Tell us what people are doing. That's a big thing in good writing. Don't describe to people what's not happening. Always figure out a way to state what is happening. And sometimes it's hard to find the right words for that, but it's important. Avoid repetition. So don't repeat yourself. Don't say it over and over again. Don't, give the idea and then, Yes.
I mean, like, if you have like a story or a legend or something like that, and somebody says at the beginning of, at the very beginning of the screenplay, and then you just not say it ever again. You don't allude to it. You don't have other characters.
You can allude to things.
Well, not allude
I'm just
to
saying,
it, but
I'm saying in action lines, you don't need to say the same. You don't, okay, for example, you don't when you say in the slug line, kitchen day. You don't need to say John walks into the kitchen. You already told us they're in the kitchen. We know that that's where he is. You just say John enters. You don't need to repeat something you've already said in the scene that you've already covered. So if the slug line is cubicle, you don't need to say John enters the cubicle and sits. You can just say John sits, because you don't need to repeat what you already said in the slug line. That's what I mean.
I guess, okay, so, you know, the kid with the fishing rod, his dad's drunken maniac.
Right.
The voiceover. And then later on in the film, when he's trying to explain to some girl why he's having commitment issues or something like that, and he says, because my father was a drunken maniac or whatever like that. And so, would that be repetition?
No, because you're not doing it right at the same moment.
And
But also but do keep in mind, if you're going to reveal information, just don't do it in the same way you did it before. Take it a step further, if you can, so that it doesn't feel. You don't want audiences to feel like you're telling them something they already know.
So
Does that make sense?
If they already know it, you just have to do it in a.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Because you're getting at, when you line by line editing, it's the slug line, or the slug line.
Right.
Day, cubicle.
Days
the
at the
next
end.
one is the action line.
Yes.
You're not going to say, it was day.
The sun shines bright outside. You don't need that. It's day.
So that's where the repetition is.
Yeah.
That's what he's talking about.
I'm just saying, don't say the same thing in two different ways in two different lines, describing the same situation or the same scene or the same whatever.
If it's important that something happens at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, do you ever say dawn or dusk? Or just say day?
Yes, but keep in mind that those are the most expensive times of day to shoot, because they have a 1 hour window to get that whole scene. So make the scene short if you're smart, and also only do it once, and it needs to be truly symbolic to the moment, so it's not a wasted time frame. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. No explanations. All actions should be self-explanatory. Okay. Now dialogue. I already talked earlier about making it a reveal, not exposition, waiting to the last moment to say it. No pleasantries. Hi, how are you? Great, thanks. What's going on with you? How's your day? Beautiful day we're having. Now, you only would have that dialogue if it's totally ironic. He walks in from a thunderstorm, drenched to the bone, pulls off his hat, shakes the water out of it. Gorgeous day we're having. Then it works, because it's not what you expect. There's a juxtaposition there. There's a conflict. But so don't use pleasantries. I don't use the word please in dialogue, because it removes conflict. I don't use thank you in dialogue. It removes conflict. Keep people moving forward. And then if you want to have a please, a thank you, or an I love you. I don't even use I love you during a movie, because it weakens the conflict. I save it for the end of the movie after the climax. And then you can let the tension reside, and you can say, I owe you my life. I love you more than anything in the world. If they've already said I love you before in the script, you haven't given us the satisfaction. Wait to give satisfaction and appreciation, and give us all those needs, but do it after the conflict is resolved for the movie. Yes?
I don't know. John Wick used a lot of pleasantries.
But he does it ironically.
Okay. Yeah.
Somebody could have shot him in the foot. He looks up and he says, thank you.
Yeah.
That works, because it's not, he doesn't mean thank you, he means fuck you.
Like, you got shot. How you doing? Oh, great. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's irony there. It's not on the nose pleasantries. Avoid on the nose. Use subtext. So instead of saying I love you, he gives her a kiss on the head. I hate your guts. When you know what he means is I love you. He's saying something that's not necessarily exactly what he means. Contradict the action. So if a dialogue, like we talk about, he's saying, you know, he's covered in bruises. He's been beat head to toe. He goes, oh, I'm great, thanks. How are you today? Then that's contradicting what we know to be physically true. No cliches, because say something in a unique way. You know, what's funny is, you know, Biff you tell us who Biff is? He goes, make like a tree and get the hell out of here. Because he literally is so stupid he doesn't know the cliche. That's saying something about character, and he messes up a cliche. If he said the cliche, it would not be worth using. Avoid unnecessary backstory. Self-explanatory. You don't need to say things that have no impediment on the plot, that don't relate to any of the decisions they're making, and don't matter at the moment. Avoid repetition. Speaks for itself. Unpredictable answers. I avoid yes and no answers to anything. I like to answer questions with questions, because most questions in a film are either rhetorical, and you don't want to give people the answers. When you ask a question in a script, 9 times out of 10 is you're asking a question because you want the audience to be thinking about what's the answer to that question. And then the best thing you can do to keep them interested is not give them the answer. Raise the question, get them thinking about it, and then ask another question right back at them. You don't need to give people... When you have a scene where somebody just keeps asking questions and somebody keeps giving answers, that's not very good dialogue. All that is, that becomes expository. So give unpredictable answers. Ask questions but don't answer them. Limit your monologues. Because things move at a clip in a movie script. We only have two, like a book can be inordinately long. And it takes a long time. Think of it this way. When you're telling a movie, you literally have under 2 hours to tell the 2 most important, life-changing hours of an entire human experience. That's what you got. You don't have time to dilly-dally. You're trying to understand and explain why things are the way that they are in the world. You don't spend time, you don't need these long pontificates, so you keep things moving. And if somebody's getting into a long diatribe about something, break it up with banter or commentary. Somebody's saying this, and then somebody else, bring it out. And if you need to get all this information out at this moment and it's coming true, have somebody else there finishing his sentences. So this happened. It's like, so it's like the audience is getting the excitement from having the dialogue move forward because they're getting it along with the audience. So if you can, when you do a monologue, I like to say, if I'm going to have a monologue, I do it once. And it better be important, it better be meaningful, and it better pertain to everything it is you want this movie to be about without hitting on the nail. In children's film, they will sometimes put the premise right there in the dialogue in the film. But for adults, we do not do that. Because it should be clear what your movie is about and what you're trying to say without having to tell them. If it is not clear without you saying it, you have not written or told your story well enough. The experiences need to bring people to the same conclusions you have without having to specifically tell them word for word what you mean.
Unless it's for like comedy aspect. I use like
you can, but even but what I would do in such a situation is that if it were a comedy, I'd say the exact opposite, and the other person turns around and slaps him. He goes, right, the other way around.
Well, I meant like,
you know what I mean? But I wouldn't have them say the exact. You know what I mean?
Well, I meant like a good example is in the movie. He's going to hate me for bringing it up, but Marvel, the Ant-Man movie.
Right.
You have Michael
Douglas.
Pena.
Okay.
Who repeats the entire plot
Right.
of that movie he's in.
Right.
And stuff. So you can, if it's for
They can.
that purpose.
They can. Doesn't mean I would.
Yeah.
Because I guess maybe because he's just good at executing it. But I really
Sure.
thought it was hilarious when he does stuff like that.
No, he's very funny. He is. He absolutely is. And if it works, it works. But for the most part, I like to keep things moving forward. And I don't like to put things on the nose because it makes the audience go, ooh, how's this going to go? Because if some people just come out and just say, at the beginning, if somebody just says, look, I love you. Can't we just do this? And the other one goes, you know what? I love you too. Now, don't get me wrong. What's great is you have the I love you moment and the other person says, huh, that's too bad. Anyway, I just like to thwart expectation because it keeps us wondering what's happening here. How's that gonna work out?
I'm not married to this guy.
Limit monologues, exaggeration. Yeah, don't over-exaggerate things because it plays melodramatic. Don't finish every line. Let people cut each other off. When people are impassioned and in a moment and arguing, they don't get to finish their sentences. Get the idea of what they're saying and cut them the hell off. They don't need to finish their thoughts. In real life, we don't get to finish our thoughts because people cut us off. Unless, of course, we're teaching class about screenwriting. Pacing, tempo, and banter. Don't limit it. Keep it going. Check beat-by-beat logic. Yeah, so it has to make sense that the person who's preaching this at the beginning of the scene doesn't change their opinion by the end of the scene unless it makes sense because they've been convinced. They can't all of a sudden be fighting on this side of an argument if they haven't been given new information, and then all of a sudden they're saying, wait, don't do that. You have to make sure the characters are consistent in their beliefs until they have been convinced otherwise. Avoid stilted and stiff dialogue. So one of the ways I do that is I use contractions in dialogue a lot, because that's the way people normally talk. You know, if people spoke like this all the time, and they said every word, and we did not have contractions, it would sound a little irritating, and perhaps it might even be a little stiff. But, you know, people talk with contractions. I'm not kidding you. You know, say things differently. And I always ask myself when I look at dialogue, if see if you can cut the first word instead of, I think you're crazy. You can just say, I think you're kind of crazy. Or say, I want apples. Instead of that, he goes, apples. You know, see how many of the words, just like enter late, leave early, think about that for your lines of dialogue as well. Ask yourself what word in that line of dialogue is the last word, is the first word you really need for it to make sense. And then look at the end of the lines and in the between words and say, are there any words in here I can get rid of to make it a stilted, strong, independent, individual sounding thing that's not stilted or common? Remember to use the state of mind, let it influence. Somebody who's being told news about something is going to react differently if they're stoned versus drunk versus in a good mood versus already depressed because they just got broken up with. So don't forget to integrate that their lines need to come from a place and a passion coordinated with what they're feeling on the inside. Tap into personality and style. We need personality. Every character has to sound different. Speech patterns, give everybody unique speech patterns. And remember, words are weapons. Don't be afraid to use words in dialogue as weapons. Cut to the quick. Okay, I rarely use providing line readings. The only time you use it for line readings is when the meaning of the line would not be understood otherwise. Like sarcasm. The line is going to read one totally different way if you don't tell us he's being sarcastic. So that's an instance in which, you know, if somebody's always being sarcastic, then I would put that in the character introduction or something so that you don't have to do it every other line. Or just make it clear that that's what they are all the time. Use it when a line is directed to someone who is not the last person who spoke. So if Anna talks to John, and John says a line, but he's not talking to Anna, he needs to be talking to Cliff, you need to say to Cliff, because when people go through a script and they're reading dialogue in order, they're going to always assume the line is addressing the person who spoke last. So if you're changing the direction of dialogue, you need to let the audience know so the flow keeps working naturally.
You'd say to Cliff parenthetically rather
Yes,
than...
and then the line of dialogue.
Okay.
Exactly. In parenthetical, there's no capitalization at the beginning, it's not a sentence, and there's no period at the end of it. It's not a sentence. They whisper, you can just say whispers. That's it. No capitals, no punctuation in it. And no physical actions go in the parenthetical. That goes in the action lines. So if he's going to wipe the sweat off his brow, that needs to be a physical action line. It's not a dialogue parenthetical between two halves of dialogue. You have to break it up and let the physical action be a physical action line.
Do you have a rule on that? Do you use it like once every script, or
I use it, my rule is, I try to use it as little, if ever, as little as I can. Yes?
Can you go back to the previous slide? It's kind
We're almost done.
Did we get on time?
We good? We good to move forward?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Overall lessons. Show, don't tell. It's what we see. Don't tell us conclusions. Show us what will make us draw our own conclusions. If you keep the reader drawing their own conclusions, that means they're mentally engaged in your script. Keep the best and cut the rest. That's why you have tricks for getting rid of as many words as you can. Write it for now, no matter when the story takes place. So this is important. You can write a movie about being a caveman, but whatever happened as a caveman should relate to something we understand today in the now, so that it's a movie that is about what's going on in our world in the present, so that people will connect to it as an audience. In other words, you always write to say something to our audience of people. If you're not writing to the people who are going to the movie theaters, then you're not writing this for an audience. Cut every word you don't need, but make sure it reads well. So don't cut out words that make the script read awkward. But cut the words you just don't need. And remember, you pick your genre, you use your personality, and you give perspective, and that is your unique voice. Hey, did you guys know I wrote a book?
Yay!